Zoo Boys, Chapter 7, Part A, Wake Up to the Jungle. As the boys slept, several disconnected thoughts found their way into their minds, mixed with the time frame still sweeping in and out as they tried to sleep on the cold, hard ground. The fire had gone out, and although the boys slept, the reality of what was taking place was clearly established in their heads. The first night, while on this fake campout, they made their way to Zoo Island. This night, they eventually slept a few hours right here on the island. They found themselves in restless sleep with dreams of what the next day was going to bring. Although their bodies shut down, their minds did not. Back home, no one noticed them missing yet. It was still only Friday night. The boys' stories held up enough for everyone to assume they were just out camping, out playing. Their second night on this island was still to come, just as Dave said while falling asleep. The second day, some people may notice they were missing, especially as Sunday afternoon grew long. By a third day, a search party would begin for sure. In John's dream, he saw a whole team of 12 Coast Guard rescue helicopters flying over the island. He imagined hopes that ropes were being dropped and the boys holding on as they flew away, taking him and his friends back home. His mind mixed in being carried off by the ant and blowing its freaking head off. The ant in the swarm sounded like a fleet of helicopters. John recalled, relived, falling through the air and landing in the pond. Dave heard choppers coming. He mumbled in his sleep, run, guys, it's the Marines. You'll never catch us alive. He recalled running through the amusement park and taking cover from the helicopters that pursued them back then. His mind formed a tapestry of him calling his gang to get into the helicopter. It featured him flying them off safely. He spoke in his sleep again. Yeah! Yay! All aboard! I got this! His words tumbled out. Jeremy turned away from Dave and curled up into a ball. He fantasized about John's sister, Karen. He smiled in his sleep. She fulfilled his imagination with actions only possible in his dreams. Ronnie heard Dave but was too sleepy to give him any attention. His mind was preoccupied with what he saw hurling down out of the sky toward him. An almost dead fish. Splat! It hit him in the face, waking him up and causing him to spring to his feet. Somehow, what was only a dream was now reality. The fish was actually there, flopping around next to Dave's head. He heard Ron shouting something, but he was too sleepy to understand what he was so alarmed about. Dave mumbled, "Shut up, Ronnie, and get in, jump or climb." Jeremy sat up. What? What are you? John began to stir. He noticed the sun was starting to give them light, and Ronnie was doing some type of dance. The thought crossed John's mind. If you have to pee, just pick a tree. Dave grumbled, Okay, just wait. What? Where did that fish come from? Ronnie pointed up. The other three looked up, and a flock of huge birds were flying overhead. John offered a solution. They must have dropped it. It happens. The fish was flopping around, still fighting for air, fighting for his life. Ronnie shouted, "Look at his head!" Dave grabbed his pack and gave the first order of the day. "Run! Grab your stuff. Let's go before he comes back for his snack." It was as if Ronnie already had his things ready to run. But He wouldn't take his eyes off the creature. He whispered, "It's a catfish." Jeremy looked as his words ran off the tip of his tongue. "I heard Zoo Island had cats with fish heads." Mid-sentence, another fish plopped to the ground next to John. He reacted, "A fish body, but a cat's head." One bird swooped down to recapture its prey. Dave led the race away. John was in the back and couldn't help but look back as he ran forward, following the rest of the boys. He tripped and fell, skimming his arms and knees on the rough paved pavement. Jeremy heard John's impact. Kaboof! John could get up and on his own, but he yelled, "Guys, wait! Help!" Jeremy slowed down. He looked back at John, forward at Ronnie and Dave in the lead, then back at John again. He stopped and turned. His good conscience took over. He heard a voice inside saying, "Turn back. Help him. You got to." That voice was overcome with another suggestion coming from within. "Save yourself. Run. Leave him. Run forward." Jeremy ignored that selfish impulse and ran back to John. John was on his feet. The bird that had swooped was heading back up into the sky. Another fish dropped just behind John. This time, Jeremy got a good look at its head. He spoke to John. "You okay? Look." John was brushing off his newly formed scabs. "Yeah, I don't want to fly with that airline. The ant was enough." "I'm sure it was. I still haven't heard the whole story." John broke in. "It's a fish with a cat head. I thought Zoo Island or John Hanson created a cat with a fish head." "Yeah, me too." They both watched as an unusually large cat came out of the bushes to snatch up the fish with a cat's head. Before the next bird could get it, John laughed with excitement as he spoke. "Ha! Well, there you go." The cat looked toward them. The fish body now his... The cat looked at them. The fish body now in his own fish-headed mouth. His cat tail flicked in the air behind him. The mutants looked at the boys was diverted by the sound of something galloping from behind him. His body alerted him of what was coming down the path. John and Jeremy expressed themselves in unison as they cheered, "Quasi!" I want to read this whole section here because I'm afraid that it didn't come out very good. Not the whole section, but this part of they both watched an unusually large cat come out of the bush to snatch the fish with the cat's head before the next bird could get it. John laughed with excitement as he spoke. "Ha! Well, there you go." The cat looked toward them. The fish body now in his own fish-headed mouth. His cat tail flicked in the air behind him. The mutants looked at the boy, was diverted by the sound of something galloping behind him. His body alerted him of what was coming down the path. John and Jeremy expressed themselves in unison as they cheered, "Quasi!" Okay, that should work better. Dave and Ron found safety in a small hut not far from where Jeremy turned back. Dave was peeking through the cracked door. "Ronnie, you gotta see this." Ron peeked out from under Dave. "Is that Quasi?" The cat's fish head dropped the fish with its own cat head and ran past John and Jeremy as Quasi chased after it. The cat/fish was running straight for the shed, the little tiny shed where Ron and Dave were taking cover. They quickly shut the door. Quasi stopped chasing the cat/fish when he reached John and Jeremy. They were bowled over with his excitement to see them. As one of the birds flying overhead swooped down to grab the fish/cat, Quasi turned to defend the boys. The cat head turned and let out a meow as the bird grabbed its fish body and flew away. Quasi fought his urge to chase the bird. His tail was hitting Jeremy and John in the face. They felt safe while their friends sat frightened in a small shack just 50 yards away. John's road rash was stinging, but he felt like they were just battle scars that he'd be proud of for years to come. "Come on, John. Quasi, I'll lead you to Ron and Dave," Jeremy proclaimed. As the two approached the shed, John called out, "Ronnie, Dave, you okay?" Ronnie stayed silent while Dave called out from the other side of the door, "Of course we are. Is the mountain lion gone?" Johnny laughed. Jeremy shook his head and held up his index finger to his mouth, advising John to not make fun of them. Then he spoke. "Yeah, it's gone. Let us in. Or you come out." Dave kicked the door open like he had seen cops do on TV. The force of his kick knocked the door straight off its hinges. "Oops, I guess I don't know my own strength." Quasi jumped on Dave, knocking him off his feet. The strong, masculine boy melted as Quasi stood over his body, dropping on his side, snuggled, almost smothering him. Ron cheered, "Quasi, good boy. Hey, look at this, guys." Ronnie pointed out a large cage in the back of the small shed. "It's like a jail." He opened the door and got in. Quasi left Dave laying there and charged toward Ronnie. As Quasi pushed him deeper into the cage, the door slammed shut behind him. The metal latch on the outside dropped, locking Ronnie and Quasi in the cell. Dave composed himself, looked back, and taunted his young friend. "Up, you're locked in there now, Ronnie." The sudden joy that Quasi brought Ronnie disappeared just as fast as Ronnie realized he was trapped. He began to panic and cry, "Let me out! Let me out! Come on, guys! Let me out!" At that moment, the ground began to shake. The other three boys ran toward the cage where Ronnie was trapped. He was still yelling, "Let me out! Let me out!" as his friends approached and were yelling, "Let us in! Let us in!" John shoved Dave and Jeremy to the side so he could lift the metal arm to unlock the cage. He swung the door open and they rushed in like marbles being shot out of a sling. "Shh! Listen!" John insisted. Ronnie was glad his friends and Quasi were all together. However, now his fear was that they were all locked in and couldn't get out. The other three stood there as they felt the ground rumbling beneath them. They heard something rolling around outside. Dave whispered, "Ew, who farted?" Jeremy whispered back, "He who smelt it dealt it." The odor drifted toward Ronnie and filled his sinus passage. His stomach began to churn a little. John repeated himself, "Shh, listen." They all crouched down as the sound and smell increased. They felt the rumbling getting stronger and more forceful. Ron was quivering. His voice shook. "What is it?" The sunlight shining in from where the front door used to be was all of a sudden being slowly blocked. Something larger than the 8-foot door was casting its shadow into the shed. Holding the bars of the cage, John looked out. He thought about how this was like a lunar eclipse or something. Some type of big, dark ball or sphere was being pushed across the entrance until it completely blocked out the sun. The rumbling stopped, and everything around them was wrapped in darkness again. They really weren't sure what to do. Quasi's tail stopped wagging, and he actually lay down flat, close to the ground. For the first time, they actually heard him make a sound like a little whimper. They all felt the temperature dropping, and the smell was overpowering and increasing. Suddenly, within a few more seconds, just before they all lost their minds, the big sphere began to move again. The sunlight creeped in from the other side. They watched as a shiny, sharp, claw-like armored legs pushed what looked like a rough ball of twine away from the front entrance of the hut. Dave whispered, "It's a huge bug." John suggested, "Yeah, I think it's a dung beetle." As it continued to push the sphere away from the opening, they were able to see its body better. John confirmed quietly, "Yep, oh yeah, it's a huge dung beetle." "Phew!" Dave spat a threat. "Well, that dang beetle better keep moving." Jeremy asked, "A dang dung beetle? What?" Ronnie tried to contribute, but it only came out as gibberish. "It done beats all?" John couldn't help but laugh while he tried to clarify and explain. "What? No, a dung beetle. They collect dung, roll it into a ball, pushing it with their back legs." John asked, "What's dung?" As Dave was about to answer, "Shh," Jeremy added, "Poop." John concluded, "Crap. They even eat some." Ronnie, feeling safe within the cage, yelled, "Eat crap and die, beetle." Dave shushed him as he replied, "He'll eat you too if you don't shut up, you dang ball. You dung dang ball." They all laughed a little bit. Jeremy teased, "Beetlejuice, Beetlejuice, Beetlejuice." Missing the reference, Ronnie answered, "I want some orange juice, not Beetlejuice. Orange juice beats all juice." John allowed his deep thoughts to be expressed. "They aren't normally that big," Ronnie suggested. "Maybe he isn't big, we're just small." Jeremy sarcastically entertained Ron's thought. "Yeah, we shrunk before we coming in here." John fought back. "You don't know. You might have." As the sunshine returned, they felt its warm rays against their skin. One beam rolled over Quasi's nose and tail, returning it to wagging. Ron asked, "How do we get out?" Ron reached through the bars and raised the locking lever outside of the containment cell. It clinked and clanked, and the door gradually swung open. John shook his fingers as he spoke and evoked imaginary powers. "Abracadabra, open sesame, open sesame." Ronnie was fascinated, as if he believed John's magic, and let out a, "Whoa, cool." Dave rolled his eyes, pushed past John, and barked, "Come on, pups, let's get moving. We only have today and tonight, then we gotta get back before we spend another night here." Ronnie asked, "We're gonna sleep here tonight, too?" Jeremy answered for Dave, "That's the plan." Ronnie wondered if he told his mom they would be gone for just one night or for 2 nights. He couldn't recall. He wasn't sure what was pretend, imaginary, or simply the truth. There were always at least two sides to every story, but the truth was the one true factor. Although Ronnie was only 11, he knew the best way to avoid lying was to not do things that require a lie to begin with. He knew that, but didn't often do that. Dave dispelled Ron's thought waves with, "Are you afraid of the dark? Afraid to stay here tonight, too?" Then something turned Dave's tone around from being hostile and mean to calm and encouraging. "Hey, last night went fine, so just one more night. We'll get through it together." Ronnie felt reassured. Jeremy was confident, and John felt strong as all four of them and Quasi exited the jail cell. Dave stood at the opening of the puny cottage and looked out before giving the go-ahead. "The coast is clear. Let's go." They followed Dave as he leaped out of the doorway as if he was leaping out of the side of an airplane. He even reached back and pulled an imaginary ripcord, deploying an imaginary parachute fabricated by his own mind. Jeremy was on the same page and yelled, "Geronimo!" Ronnie followed and yelled, "Jeremiah!" John just laughed as he made his exit, amused at the three boys in front of him. He briefly looked back and made sure Quasi was coming along for their next big adventure, their next epic encounter. That ends Zoo Boys Chapter 7, Part A.